Hello, lovers of Black true crime. Let me welcome you to the Noir Nation. If I asked you to name me three Black serial killers, could you do it? What about a Black person that's pulled off a heist of epic proportions? Don't worry, I couldn't either. But being a lover of true crime and all things Black, I decided to combine these two passions into a true crime podcast exploring some of the most intriguing and lesser known criminal masterminds with a melanated leading cast. Each week, I will bring you the stories of some of the most prolific criminals you've never heard of. I'm your host, Renee Davis, and this is the Melanin Mayhem podcast. Hello and welcome back, Noir Nation. Oh my goodness, I have missed y'all so much. But baby, never fear, I am back with another prolific criminal you've probably never heard about. Baby, don't you know it's not safe out here? Y'all hear me? You can't even call for a car without fear of getting got. Noir Nation, I have a cautionary tale for you about how familiarity can lead to your demise, honey. The familiarity I am talking about is the kind that develops when you see the same person regularly and think because you see them, air quotes around see them, you know what kind of person that you're dealing with. I'm talking about the bus driver that drives that route you take to and from work, or the doorman at your friend's building that you see in passing a couple of times a month. You know, when you go over there for a visit. Or that person that works over there at that coffee shop that you frequent. This week's Melanin Mayhem maker drove a taxi and gave 7 unsuspecting women a ride to the afterlife that they was not planning on, honey. He used charm and bullshit to get next to them. Our Melanin Mayhem maker this week is Mr. Paul Durousseau, aka the Jacksonville Strangler. Let me give you a little bit of history about old Paul. Paul Durousseau was born August 11th, 1970 in Beaumont, Texas. His mama, her name was Deborah Page. I was able to find at least one sibling for Paul. He had an older brother whose name was Joseph Durousseau III. I'm thinking since he's a third, maybe their father was the senior, making him Joseph Durousseau Sr. I don't know. Don't have any background on that. But we do know that at some point his family moved to California and he ends up graduating from Reseda High School in LA in 1989. Now at this time, he's a young guy. Paul is kind of bouncing around looking for his purpose. He had a few jobs, security guard, fast food worker, That post-high school job market ain't always that sweet. He also had a couple of run-ins with the law. Nothing major at this point, really. I mean, he got popped twice for carrying a concealed firearm, and he ended up with probation for those charges. But I'm saying, he did live in LA, and in the 90s, that place was a little wild, so he might have needed that gun for protection. Eventually, Paul would join the Army around age 22 so that he could be all he could be. And he was stationed in Germany. So our boy is overseas. And while he is stationed in Germany, he would meet his boo, who would later go on to become his wife. They ended up jumping the broom somewhere around 1995 over there in Sin City. I'm talking about Vegas. After they got married, both of them being in the military, they eventually got stationed in Fort Benning, Georgia. Georgia being my neck of the woods. Shout out to Fort Benning. Well, once Paul got to Georgia, he did get into some shit. On March 13th, 1997, he caught a rape and kidnapping charge after a night out at the club, and some unlucky young lady got caught up in his bullshit. But wouldn't you know, a military court dismissed those charges? It probably came down to being her word against his, add in some alcohol, and the law usually believes that the act was consensual. So the military didn't think that he was a kidnapping rapist, but they did think that he was a thief. He got popped for being in possession of stolen goods, and after being convicted by that same military court that didn't think he was a rapist, they kicked his ass out the army. Damn it, Paul. Around that same time, y'all, I'm talking September 1997, a woman named Tracy Habersham was found in a ditch after having been out for a night at the club in Columbus, Georgia. Columbus being the city that Fort Benning is located in. Police had no leads on her killer, and Tracy's case went cold for about 5 years. We'll circle back around to Tracy. Now, I ain't gonna cut no corners with y'all. I'm not gonna hold you. Paul was a creep. Like, he was the type of nigga that'll say some slick shit to some young girls. You know that dude that'll hit on anything that's got a split? He really and truly, to his soul, thought that he was God's gift to women. A man with no job, no money, and a wife? Honey, please, yeah, that dude thought he was the catch of the century, baby. Well, after getting into that little bit of trouble in Fort Benning and getting kicked out of the army, him and his wife decided that it was time to take the midnight train out of Georgia and head south to Jacksonville, which was her hometown. And baby, they got to work on practicing their baby making skills, and before long they popped out 2 bouncing baby girls. But however, Paul has a really inflated sense of self-worth, and things between him and his wife were going really, really bad. They are fighting more than they're kissing, right? And Paul apparently was going upside her head. They would fight, she would get a restraining order, then she would drop it because they've made up. And that cycle went on for about 2 years before he finally went too far and she started pressing charges against his ass. He spent about 2 months in jail for a domestic violence incident. They finally completely separated in January of 2003. Although I don't know if completely was the right word. Maybe they just went to separate domiciles. Paul stayed over here, his wife stayed over there. He'd come see the kids, hit a little bit, something, maybe get a plate, and then bounce. Now, during all of this time now, please believe Paul is still picking up charges for stuff like trespassing, burglary, non-consensual sex, and rape. Yeah, that's right, you heard me. In June of 2001, he was accused of rape by a 19-year-old woman named Tamika Thompson. She said she met Paul one day while she was walking to work. He pulled up on her, he spit a little game, she thought he was cute, and when she got off work, he came back and they started kicking it from that point forward. Well, kicking it, meaning they were intimate a little bit. They had a little situationship going on, according to her, until one day, Paul came over to her house and he had a hickey on his neck. Ooh, you think maybe that hickey came from his wife? I'm just saying. Tamika flipped out when she saw the hickey and she was like, "Get out my house. I don't want nothing else to do with you. We done, blah, 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 blah." You know how it goes. Well, she thought she was going to be the only one doing the flipping. Come to find out, Paul turned around and flipped out on her ass and started going upside her head. He all aggressive and throwing her around, and then the next thing you know, she says he takes her and he rapes her. So of course she goes to the police. They charge him with sexual battery, but his court-appointed attorney got it pled down to simple assault, which got him 30 days in jail and 2 years probation. Some bullshit, right? It's another recurring theme that we see in so many of these cases. These people are in and out of jail without any consequence. I mean, Paul was still doing fuck shit. He is in and out of cop cars, but nothing really stuck like it should have, especially seeing as how Paul was on probation for them gun charges in California. So before he made it to the East Coast, while he was on the West Coast, he was on probation. So when he got to the East Coast, any charges that came up against him should have been automatically had him in violation of his probation, and he should have been sent back to jail. Maybe if that had happened, so many lives would have been spared. But unfortunately, that's not the case. He gets arrested, the charges either get dropped or pled down, and he is back out on the streets, and the cycle continues. I guess that's a topic for another podcast, y'all. I'll put that on my to-do list. But anyway, back to Paul. He is still bouncing around from job to job, gig to gig, trying to figure something out, right? This nigga's doing everything that'll hire him. He has worked for the city as a dog catcher. He was even a school bus driver. Now, how in the world somebody that has assault convictions and weapons convictions, how are they able to work with the kids? I don't know, but Paul did. And in 1999, he was working as a mechanic. So let me tell you about some of the things that started happening. So there's this lady. Her name was Teresa Mack, and she was the mother of 2 children, one of which was an asthmatic child, right? Had asthma problems. And on July 26th of 1999, she dropped her kids off at daycare, and then she and a friend hit the streets to go fill out job applications because Teresa needs a job. She has bills to pay, kids to take care of, but she misses work a little bit because one of her kids has a medical issue, right? So, she's out, she's trying to find her job. And it's a hot day, so after some point, she stops job hunting and she goes back to her apartment. It's a hot day. Like I said, she probably wanted to freshen up a little bit before she had to take her kid to the doctor. Well, she missed the doctor's appointment. Now, Teresa is not that kind of mama, so instantly the family knows something is not right. That evening, her sister and her stepdad went over to her apartment. They go in. The house seems to be fine. Everything is clean and in order, right? Then they go in her bedroom. The room looks like a fight has just really broken out and somebody went down. And it's here that they find Teresa. Her body is laying face down with a telephone cord wrapped around her neck. Oh my goodness. This case went unsolved for 4 years. The police didn't have any suspects. They had no evidence to work towards prosecuting Teresa Mack's killer. So the case went cold. They had DNA, but when they ran it, it didn't match anybody. This person was not in the system. Damn it, man. Well, in the early 2000s, Jacksonville had a problem on their hand. There was a killer that was on the loose, that was out there strangling and sexually assaulting women. And the Jacksonville Serial Killer had a type. He liked them young, he liked them black, short in stature, and either pregnant or they had children. Those were his preferences. He also had a preferred hunting ground because all of the victims lived within a 5-mile radius of each other. So first off, 18-year-old Nicole Williams was a high school student. She was found wrapped in a blanket in a ditch, strangled. No clue as to who left her there. Okay, so the city's getting on edge a little bit, but of course, they're not making a big deal out of this. The victims are black. You know, I'm not even going to go there. But let's fast forward just a little bit. It's New Year's Day, 2003, and a young woman named Sarah is trying to see where her friend, 19-year-old Nakia Kilpatrick, is. Now, she hasn't heard from Nakia in a few days, which is strange, because Nakia is pregnant and they talk all the time, not to mention it's New Year's Day, so she hadn't talked to her best friend, so what does she do? She does what any BFF does. She marched herself right over to Nakia's apartment to see what the hell was going on. Well, Nakia didn't answer the door, and as Sarah is standing out front trying to figure out what her next move is, she sees the blinds move in Nakia's apartment. And there is Nakia's oldest child. Now, oldest child meaning a toddler. We're talking about a child that's less than 4 years old. This baby is looking out the window at Sarah. And Sarah is like, what the fuck? Y'all don't hear me knocking on the door. So Sarah goes over to the window, and when she looks in, she can see that the house is a mess and Nakia is lying on the floor. So of course Sarah is freaking out. She calls for help. And when the police go inside, Lord have mercy, Nakia is dead and has been dead for a couple of days. Her babies have been in there with their dead mother for at least 2 days. These babies have been in this house with their dead mother, scrounging around in the kitchen for food, opening up anything that was dry and in a box. You know what I'm talking about, cereal, stuff like that. And I'm still talking about a baby and a toddler here. We're not even going to talk about this trauma, the absolute fucking trauma that they had to have gone through being in the house with their dead mother who is bound and strangled with a cable cord. Their dead mother that's been here for 2 days, so she's decomposing. That's too much for a full-grown ass adult, much less a child that is dependent on its mother for everything. I can imagine in my mind's eye these kids trying to wake their mom up, seeing her bloody and bruised. I can't imagine the trauma that was inflicted on them, and I truly hope that they got those kids some counseling, continued counseling. But back to Nakia. Nakia was 6 months pregnant. The police are processing this crime scene. There are no fingerprints. Nobody in the neighborhood saw anything. There was no forced entry. So Nakia must have let them in. So we're talking about somebody that she knew, right? They really don't have a lot to go on, but what they do have is the semen that was found on Nakia's body. Now, they're going to look at it and test it to try to find her killer, but no dice. Killer's not in the system. Just 10 days later, on January 10th, 2003, another black woman is found murdered 1 mile down the road from Nakia's apartment. As the story goes, Rashid Toupee was out and about doing what it was that he was out and about doing. He goes back to the apartment that he shares with his girlfriend, 20-year-old Shawanda McAllister, who was a CNA at the time, studying to be a nurse. Rashad is knocking on the door. He forgot his key, but Shawanda isn't answering the door. So he goes around the side of the apartment building and comes into the house through a window. Because it's like, shit me, I'm getting in this apartment. So he comes in. And boom, he's in the room and he sees his girlfriend. His girlfriend that is pregnant with his baby is lying face down on the floor, half naked, ankles bound with an electrical cord that was cut off from their television. This woman is dead and she is strangled by another cord around her neck that was cut from another appliance from in the apartment. Of course, Rashid freaks out. He calls the police. The police get there and at this point they're like, oh shit, we got a problem because Shawanda was bound the exact same way Nakia was. They also found a used condom beside her body and an ATM receipt where it showed Shawanda had went and withdrew some money around 8 o'clock that same night. So the police, they brought Rashid in for questioning because, of course, first thought is that the boyfriend or the husband, significant other, they're the ones that did it, right? And the cops know that, or in the back of their minds, they're thinking that this guy, whoever this guy is, was the same guy who's done these other murders, right? But now they're trying to figure out, were these rapes or was it consensual sex between grown folks? Sir, what kind of community dick do y'all think that these women were passing around? Shawanda got a boyfriend. Both Nakia and Shawanda were pregnant. Black women do not do a lot of sexing of other men that aren't their baby's father while they're pregnant. Y'all know. Sure, I know that there are exceptions to every rule, but on this one, ain't no way the same suspect hit both of those women. Sexually, I'm talking about. Statistically, it's just not what's done. But as I was researching it, in the case of Shawanda, could it have been? Because her boyfriend, Rashid, he tells the cops a crazy ass story about all of the events of that day. So he says that he and Shawanda were together earlier that day at the laundromat. After they finished doing the laundry, he had to go to school. He was studying to be a plumber. And so he's doing night courses, right? And so he comes back to her apartment a few hours later. He says that he's knocking on the door, but Shawanda wouldn't answer. But he wasn't willing to give up because he can kind of hear something going on inside the house. So he's beating on the door. And at some point, he hears a male voice inside. He says it sounded like it was a black dude. He says Shawanda comes to the door, but she opens it with the chain on the door so he can't get inside. And she tells him that right now isn't a good time and she'll explain it to him later. Now, Rashid wants us to believe that he was cool with all of this, right? All he wanted was his work clothes out the apartment and that he actually left the apartment where his pregnant baby mama was inside with another man. Okay, Rashid. He said Shawanda put the clothes outside, he got his clothes, and then he bounced to let her do whatever it was she was doing. Now, I know, your first thought is, this nigga lying through his teeth. And the cops thought that too. So, they politely asked him, will you take a polygraph? And Rashid was like, bet, run it. Rashid did indeed take the polygraph. And this dude not only passed, he passed with flying colors. He was telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So, okay, I was wrong. We were wrong. The police asked him for a DNA sample. He willingly gives them a DNA sample. And he ain't a match. However, the DNA, once it's processed, it shows that the same person that killed Nakia also left his DNA in that used condom. Whoever it is, so frustrating, is not in the database yet. The police now start to investigate that ATM receipt they found, right? The ATM receipt was timestamped for 8:30 p.m. Now, Rashad would have been getting out of class at around 9 p.m. That's not much time for a little smash and dash, but I guess it's doable. But when they check the surveillance cameras for the ATM, they can clearly see a taxi cab in the background waiting on her to finish her transaction. 2 witnesses say that they saw a Gator City cab parked near her apartment, right? Around 9 p.m. that night, and they said it left around 11:30 p.m. that night. Cabs were Shawanda's usual mode of transportation. So off to the cab company, the cops go to go interview cab drivers, right? They want to see who picked up Shawanda. They talked to some of the cab drivers, but guess who wasn't at work that day? Oh, Paul. Well, okay, shit. They got to keep on doing some more investigating. But while they're investigating, stuff is still happening. Imagine it. You work in construction, and you come to work one day expecting it to be just a regular day, right? That is, until you hear some dogs barking. And of course, being nosy, you go over to see what these dogs are barking about, because it's some puppies and they're cute, right? But as you go over to investigate, you see a pair of legs sticking out. Holy shit! Y'all, this actually happened. A construction worker calls the cops, and they come to the location, and the construction worker is like, it's over there. And so the cops go to where the construction worker has pointed them out to, and they see this body of a dead black woman. So tell me why, as they are, just looking around the perimeter trying to take in the scene, they can see another motherfucking body just a few feet away. Capital letters, all caps. What the fuck? Come to find out, both of these young women have been reported missing by their families a few days prior. Both of these women have been sexually assaulted and strangled, and the cords that were used to strangle them had the same knotting or the same tie pattern as the previous murders. The police determined that these bodies belonged to 17-year-old Giovanna Jefferson and 19-year-old Sarita Cohen. Now, in the case of Giovanna, they had some background to go on. She's 17 years old, like I said. And the day that she was reported missing, her family says that Giovanna had been on the phone with some dude named D that drove a cab. And she was last seen getting into a Gator City cab, heading to the store, never to return. So again, she is headed to the store. Her family knows she's going to the store. When she didn't come back from the store, they got a little worried. And so her auntie called her phone, just to try to see what's going on. Well, when she called the phone, a man answered Giovanna's phone. When she asked him where Giovanna was, he told her that Giovanna would be home in a minute. So a minute, time passes, no Giovanna. So her mom then goes down to the cab company to try to get some info. Y'all gonna tell me where my baby got dropped off and who the fuck is D? They saw that it was Paul's cab that got the call. So now the police have something to work with. They check Giovanna's cell phone records, and they see that she has a call that fits the time frame to who other than Mr. Paul Durousseau. Well, after Giovanna and Sarita's bodies are found, the authorities decide, you know what, y'all, we need to all the detectives, we need to all get together in one room and let's go over some of our cases and see if we can compare notes and come up with something. And when they do that, they start to see a common name popping up, Paul Durousseau. Or they see a common automobile popping up, a taxi, a Gator City taxi. Not just any taxi, a Gator City taxi. They got something to work with. Now, what's crazy is that Paul wasn't arrested for any of the murders that he was suspected of. They arrested him on a probation violation. Say what, Nay? Yeah, they got him on a probation violation. Now, regardless of the fact that he violated his probation 1,000 times over the years, right? Now you want to get him on a probation violation. Yep, we sure do. You know why? Because this probation violation gets us in the door. Once we get in the door, we can start piling other shit on. Y'all remember that sexual assault case that I told you about that he caught just a simple battery charge for? Well, he got probation. And part of the conditions for the probation was that Paul had to attend sexual rehabilitation classes. And he wasn't doing it. So they used his not going to the classes as a way to violate his probation. And they did that on February 6, 2003. That's 2 years later. So they've got him arrested. They're letting his cool his heels in jail on a probation violation while they keep on building a murder case against him, right? The probation violation is just the key that they need to open the lock on the DNA that they got from all of their victims that currently have no match. So what they did was they called up his PO and they said, hey, PO, did y'all do a cheek swab on Paul when he was convicted? And the PO says, why, yes, of course, we sure did. And the detectives are like, okay, can we get that please expeditiously? And so they send over the DNA swab, they test it, and boom, they got a match. Paul Durousseau is the Jacksonville Strangler. Now all they got to do is prove it. It's time to get all of the ducks in a row because in case you didn't know, in Florida, when they charge somebody with a crime, they only have a set amount of time to get them to trial. If you fuck around and miss that deadline, that's your case and your ass. So the state needed all the evidence that they could get to nail Paul's ass to the wall before they could charge him with murder. Now that they have Paul as their man, the police go back and re-interview all of the people associated with these cases. And this time, the photo array has new pictures in it. And of course, Paul's picture is in there. Now people are saying, yeah, I know him. Or yeah, that's the cab driver. Or yeah, that's so-and-so's friend. Or that was acquaintance of so-and-so. Or that was the nigga that was trying to fuck my friend. All of that. People are placing him at scenes of crimes. Or they are placing that Gator City cab at the scene of these crimes. The evidence is building, y'all. This nigga was using that cab to get next to his victims. Because think about it. The cab driver is chatting you up. And I'm sorry, if you are too young to know what a cab ride is like, just think of what your Uber drive is like. Taxi cabs were a precursor to Ubers, and they are still available in every city and town, especially the non-metropolitan areas that are too small to have a real Uber market, right? But anyway, he is getting next to these people who are riding in his cab by being charming and flirtatious, right? Think about it. These women are taking cabs regularly. They saw him, he saw them. A familiarity of sorts begins to build. He running game, and they fall for it and let this monster get close, and he kills. Shawanda caught a ride with Paul. He doubled back and killed her. Probably told her he left something in his cab, when he knocked on her door unexpectedly, and she just let him in. Giovanna and Sarita, they're both last seen getting into a cab. And as a cab driver, he is seen by witnesses as being one of the last people these women interacted with. Then the police use cell phone records and the rosters from the cab pickups. They keep a roster of every call that comes in, and they use these to prove that Paul had contact with the women with the cell phone records, and then of course that he was the cab driver that picked them up when they placed a call for a ride. The police executed a search warrant on his home and on his car, and they found a blanket in his house that had DNA on it, and in his car they found some jewelry from both Sarita Cohen and Giovanna Jefferson. So the DA convened a grand jury, and the grand jury indicted on 5 counts of first-degree murder for Nicole Kilpatrick, Shawanda McAllister, Giovanna Jefferson, Sarita Cohen. And then they had 2 counts of child endangerment for those babies that he left in the house with their dead mother. But here's the thing. When they arrested him on August 26, 2003, he was only charged with Teresa Mack's murder. See, the state did what's called a nolle prosse, and what that means, with those other 5 counts of first-degree murder and the 2 counts of aggravated child abuse, it basically means that the state declines to prosecute on those charges. It's more like yeah, we know you did it, but for right now, we just gonna let the shit slide. But you know that we know you did it, and at any time we can decide to come back and get you on this. They went with the Teresa Mack case because her case had the strongest evidence, DNA evidence, eyewitness testimony that could put Paul at the scene at the time of the murders. The other cases, while they had evidence, it was a bit more circumstantial, and a lawyer, I ain't even gonna say a good lawyer, a lawyer could help Paul wiggle out of those charges, and we know he's been wiggling out of charges his whole life, right? And it is around this time that the police in Columbus take a closer look at their cold case on Tracy Habersham. Remember the young lady who was found in a ditch in Columbus, Georgia? Well, they realized that her murder followed the same MO as the Jacksonville cases. They test the DNA, and what do you know? It's a match to Paul. They're going to charge him with Tracy Habersham's murder, although he may not get a chance to be doing any real time after Florida gets through with him, right? The Florida DA was like, look, I ain't even gonna hold you. I'm going straight for the death penalty. And that's exactly what he did. when they went to trial, they were able to present evidence from the murders that he wasn't on trial for in an effort to connect all of the strangulation deaths through the type of knot that he tied with those cables and cords. You see, these were distinct slip knots, kind of like the ones they would teach you to do in the military. Paul didn't even realize that muscle memory would be a part of his undoing. He was probably in his mind just thinking he was tying a knot. He wasn't realizing that he was actually leaving a signature. Before the trial, when they had Paul in questioning, the detectives are kind of slick with it. They don't get real deep in the beginning, just a few run-of-the-mill questions. And Paul is still thinking, he's cocky, I got this, whatever. And so when they start getting to the meat of the situation, Paul, like all of the rest of the killers who've ever been questioned by police, denied all his crimes like Peter did Jesus. He didn't know nothing. He ain't seen nothing. What are you talking about? I ain't no killer. I have never killed anybody. When they asked him how his DNA either ended up inside of the victims or in a condom near the victims, at first he didn't know how that could happen either. That was so shocking, right? Then Paul told them that, I'm irresistible. Women love me. They all want me. And that's probably why you found my DNA, if you found my DNA. We all had consensual sex. If my shit there, that shit was consensual. Well, as most killers, when they get to talking, sometimes they start talking too much, because then he started copping to knowing some of them, like he knew Teresa Mack. Then he said that he had been over Teresa's house, but they had consensual sex, and Mack sold him her TV, right? She said it was broken and she ain't want it. So you bought a broken TV? Make it make sense, Paul, to somebody. It didn't make sense to the police, it didn't make sense to the prosecutor, and it didn't make sense to the jury, because they found him guilty of premeditated first-degree murder. And guess what, baby? His sentence, the death penalty. The DA told you he was not playing with that ass. So he's sentenced to death. He's off to death row. Well, the wheels of justice, or the wheels of the death date, are slow, because in 2017, Paul is still around and kicking. And of course, he has his appeals that he's running through or whatnot. But in January of 2017, the Florida Supreme Court overturned his death penalty. Yes, you heard me. 10 years later, he should have been dead, but I digress. 10 years later, they overturned his death sentence. The reason that they overturned it, when the jury originally voted on the death sentence, it wasn't a unanimous vote. It was a split vote. 10 people voted for death and 2 people did not. Well, they kind of just ran over those 2 people who didn't agree to death and went right on to the death sentence, right? But that's not how the law goes. To put a bitch to death, it has to be a unanimous decision, or it's a no-go. And since this was not a unanimous decision, it's a no-go. So Paul's death sentence was commuted to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Wow. Now, Paul is currently serving out his sentence at the Northwest Florida Reception Center in Chipley, Florida. What a cute name for a prison. Northwest Florida Reception Center. They make it sound like it's somewhere that you can go through an event. Y'all, we having a baby shower. Yeah, I'm gonna send you the address. It's over at the Northwest Florida Reception Center. Yeah, no, it's prison, y'all. Can I get a real name? But anywho, y'all, Noir Nation, that is the story of Paul Durousseau. A prolific killer from the 99 and 2000s that you've never heard of. And as I stated in my intro, y'all need to be careful being too familiar with people you don't really and truly know. Just because you see them regularly or interact on a superficial level from time to time, that does not by any means mean you know somebody. Because with the superficial interaction, you can't even believe that you're actually engaging with their true self. Honey, you can best believe that is a representative, sweetie. That security guard that smiles at you and tells you good morning and compliments you on your attire. You don't know that man? You don't know that woman? And anybody that damn chipper at 9 a.m. has to be sadistic, right? All jokes aside, don't let familiarity cloud your good judgment. That Uber driver at your door talking about you left something in the Uber, you don't have to open the door. You can simply tell them to leave it on the porch. I'll get it tomorrow, right? Or that pizza delivery guy that came back and asked can he use your phone to call the store because his car broke down. You don't have to open up your door. You can offer to call the store for them. And again, don't open the door. You don't know that man. You don't know that woman. So stop acting like you do. It may just be the last thing you do. All right. That's enough preaching. I hope that you have enjoyed this episode. And if you did, why not leave us a review wherever you are listening to your podcast? And if you are a social media person, you can hit me up over there too. On Twitter, we're the Melanin Mayhem PC. On Facebook and Instagram, we are Melanin Mayhem Podcast. And if you know of a melanated mayhem maker that you would like for me to do an episode on, drop me a line over at melaninmayhempodcast@gmail.com. Until next week, stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember, if you stay ready, you ain't got to get ready. It's one love, New Orleans Nation, and I am out.